Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to the Courtauld at the Venerable campus. My name is Sujatha Meegama, and I teach Buddhist art history at the Courtauld. And I convene the MA in Art History and Conservation of Buddhist Heritage and oversee the Robert H. N. Hall Family Foundation Center for Buddhist Art History and Conservation, along with my colleague, Dr. Poulan, in the Conservation Department. Once again, a very warm welcome to all of you to our first public lecture for this new academic year. Today, we are celebrating a very special exhibition at the British Museum, Ancient India Living Heritage. And you will, of course, hear more about this exhibition from its curator, Dr. Sujatha, who is here with us this evening. If you haven't seen the show, run and see it after the panel discussion, of course, tomorrow. And here is just the catalog that I brought just for you to see of the exhibition that Sushma and her colleague Suresh Kumar have written for this exhibition. But we are also celebrating and critically reflecting on a significant object from Sri Lanka, the bronze statue of Tara that is showcased at this special exhibition. Donated to the British Museum in 1830 by Sir Robert Brownray, this nearly life-size sculpture of Tara was extracted from Sri Lanka in 1820 when the former governor of British Ceylon returned to the UK. Although now a stronghold of Theravada Buddhism, the island was once home to Mahayana Buddhist communities who valued such deities as seen in this solid cast built bronze sculpture. Tonight, we bring together 4 different voices to expand and complicate our understandings of the statue of Tara in its multiple contexts, that is, in Sri Lanka and in the United Kingdom, highlighting various aspects about the goddess and this sculpture. Each speaker has around 10 minutes at most to share their observations and discoveries. And we will devote the last 20 minutes or so of this kind of discussion to a question and answer session with each other, but also with all of you. And starting us off today is Venerable Mahinda Deegalle, Professor Emeritus at Spa University, who will briefly share with us the history of Mahayana Buddhism in Sri Lanka and connect Tara to a World Heritage Site in Sri Lanka, see video. I will follow Venerable Deegalle and share some observations about other Tara sculptures from Sri Lanka, including some brief reflections about the replicas inspired by the Tara at the British Museum. My former colleague, Mary Wong, who is now Senior Program Officer at the Getty Foundation, will help us carefully examine the Tara from Sri Lanka at the British Museum through the lens of a conservator. And last but not least, Dr. Sujatha, Curator of Early South Asia at the British Museum and the curator of the exhibition, Ancient India Living Heritage, will speak about the curatorial history of the Kyoto bronze Tara from Sri Lanka at the British Museum. One goal today is to show through this panel discussion that to study even one object, we need the expertise of different specialists. Our MA program and our center are deeply committed to collaborating with experts, professionals, and the Buddhist community, as we recognize the importance of the various stakeholders in producing new knowledge about Buddhist heritage and preserving it for the future. Today is one example of this commitment to collaboration between disciplines, institutions, and communities. This panel is probably the first ever public gathering about the Tara, inspired by the research my former colleague Laurie and I did for a publication about the Tara that came out last year. And it is certainly inspired by Sushma's exhibition that not only showcases the Tara, but also highlights the importance of provenance and community collaboration. During our research, we stumbled upon Venerable Deegalle's writings about Mahayana Buddhism in Sri Lanka, and he has been a great supporter of our MA program and center. So I've invited my colleagues to this panel and gathered all of us in this space in good faith, and would like to remind all of us that as we approach our conversations about the Tara from Sri Lanka, that we approach with great care, respect, and generosity. Please join me in welcoming all our
it's nice to come to Courtauld again, and thanks for Dr. Sujatha and Meegama for inviting me for this occasion. And I have kind of modified my title a little bit so that I don't overlap with others, and so there will be something new for the discussion. So I kind of changed it to controversial argument for Tara and Sigiriya. And we are gathered here to explore the history and cultural practices of the iconic image of Tara at the British Museum. Our revisit of Tara is significant in light of new archaeological discoveries and historical debates. Let me introduce today a recent debate in relation to the cult of Tara and Mahayana Buddhism in Sri Lanka. I hope you can hear me. Yeah? Okay, good. So this is kind of the rough outline what I will do, and depending on the time, sometimes I will skip some sections, but broadly I will more focus on the number 4, 5, those two areas. Yeah. So Sigiriya is a world-famous 5th century mountain fortress in Sri Lanka. It is renowned for its beautiful frescoes of divine angels. This is my word. It may not be accurate. This ancient site is situated in the central province of Sri Lanka. Sigiriya has enticed countless native and foreign visitors. Undoubtedly, it is the most romantic and secular archaeological site in Sri Lanka. Until recent times, no one had dared to consider the Sigiriya site as having any serious religious significance, especially Buddhist. Also, to celebrate Sigiriya's importance is highlighting Mahayana Buddhist expansion in Sri Lanka. This is a little bit the things that I already mentioned, I think. Raja de Silva, a former archaeological commissioner of Sri Lanka, has put forward a controversial theory suggesting the presence of Mahayana Buddhist practitioners on the summit of Sigiriya rock even before, on that there, yeah, on the mountain, on the rock, before Kassapa I, who lived in the 5th century. And this is well before King Kassapa aesthetically populating the site. King Kassapa was a patricidal king who shaped, molded, and elevated what Sigiriya is today to the world. I think his killing father may have significant influence of what it is Sigiriya today. I cannot explain it fully, but it may have a role to do, something to explore in the future. So here you can see, this is Sigiriya in almost the little bit above the center, and it's about 650 feet high, and quite amazing. The water is found even on the top with the water fountains and so on. So these are the items found there. So now, interpretations of Sigiriya. Let's see. Yeah, this is the mountain. Yeah. So these are the frescoes we are talking about. See, Sigiriya has been a quite interesting place for many people, apart from Raja de Silva. H.C.P. Bell, who was the first archaeological commissioner who researched on this, explained these frescoes portray King's court, King Kassapa's court. Actually, they were in a devotional position to a temple nearby called Pidurangala. And then Sri Lankan Archaeology Commissioner Senrat Paranamitana suggested they represent lighting princes and cloud damsels, and we will come into it a little bit later. And then famous Ananda Kumar identified them as Apsaras. And recently, Bandaranaike suggested Sigiriya ladies are celestial nymphs. Kind of there is discussion like that more, but nothing to. They say nothing about Tara except the person that I'm talking about. Of course, it's understandable because I think last 40 years we had a lot of research in Sri Lanka on archaeological aspect. So the Mahayana Buddhism in Sri Lanka is quite unique in some ways. It started probably from around the 6th, 7th century, flourished from 8 to around 11th, 12th. So beginning with the internationally renowned epigraphist Paranamittana, several historians have argued for the historical existence of strong links of non-Theravada Buddhist traditions. Theravada Buddhism appears to have coexisted alongside the forms of Mahayana Buddhism and Tantrayana Buddhism. And now these are examples that we have, apart from what is found in the British Museum. We have this 9th century image of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Now it's in Colombo Museum. And this is another image of Tara found in Colombo Museum, which belongs to 9th and 10th centuries. I think this one, even though not standing, somewhat similar to what we have in the British Museum. And so Sigri excavations were started in 1980s, and so all the scholars that I mentioned, they were well before, and so they didn't have this knowledge. So we have to think about that also. So Sigri, as a Mahayana monastery, is a very interesting one. This is the work that I am referring to. It's a published book. It's called Sigiri and Its Significance. So Raja de Silva, he was a former archaeological commissioner in 1979, presented a bold analysis of the ancient monument of Sigiri, and his thought-provoking interpretation will have a significant impact on the understanding and the nature of Mahayana Buddhism in Sri Lanka. Raja de Silva argues that Sigiri encompasses a vast monastic complex of Mahayana type rather than a Theravada one, a site which embraces both Theravada and Mahayana practices, and it spans many centuries. It came to function long before King Kassyapa's reign in the 5th century and lasted and continued long after his reign. And De Silva's assessment of Sigiri as a Mahayana Buddhist site may have been influenced by after they were doing the archaeological excavation. You can see here in particular this area, and here a lot of research has gone into excavations and writing and so on. So, Silva's assessment of Sigiri as a Mahayana Buddhist site may have been influenced by other scholarly views, such as that of Bandaranayake. With reference to Sigiri's Buddhist legacy, for example, Bandaranayake states this: the historical period as Sigiri begins about the 3rd century BC. This date is very important. This is the year that Buddhism came to Sri Lanka. So it's kind of basically saying this has lasted from the very beginning of Buddhism. And the establishment of Buddhist monastic settlement on the rock-strewn western and northern slopes of the hill around the rock. And then Bandaranayake make an archaeological argument that there are about 70 caves with inscription with donations, and these donations, inscription range from 3rd century BC to 1st century CE, and they always donations the cave to the monks. Now, contesting previous interpretations, De Silva contends that the female paintings on the rock are not depictions of King Kassyapa's queens, the bells argument, or cloud damsels, which is Paranamittana's argument, or Kumaraswamy's Apsaras. Instead, De Silva asserts that these paintings are closely linked to Mahayana Buddhist practices in ancient Sri Lanka, and argues specifically that frescoes depict the female voice of the Tara. So that's his argument. These are kind of Tara's images or Tara's devotion. So according to De Silva, this is also interesting. Lions symbolize Tara. In adoration of Tara, the frescoes are dedicated. Each figure exemplifies Tara, and his point is that the repetition of the object of worship is a characteristic of Mahayana meditation practice. This area, I think we have to explore what he says. He has not detailed it out, but it's something to explore, to what extent this matter correlate with the Mahayana Buddhist practice. So we must note here, however, while the frescoes are present, no image of Tara has yet been discovered at Sigiri, making it difficult to substantiate De Silva's theory purely on archaeological terms. Nevertheless, Sara statues have been found at the other Sri Lankan sites, as I showed earlier, and these are the Meegama, and this is the kind of lion, the lion paw, which kind of we associate with the gate of Tara, some of the paintings. And it's very interesting. Japan produced a stamp in 2002, where kind of the Sigiri represents Sri Lanka. It's only one selected, So it's kind of, that's the lion's paw. And this is another Buddhism, kind of 8th, 9th century, 9th, 10th century site. Here you see Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva that you saw, and this is Tara, the image of Tara carved there. And there is another site, this Kustaragala, people don't know very much this one. This is another image of Avalokiteshvara. So he's a protector of the people who go on the fishing and the ocean, go on the ocean and so on. So he's kind of on the southern coast of Sri Lanka. And this is also Avalokiteshvara, the same statue. And then by the 12th century, you see Galvihara in Polonnaruwa, not far away from Sigiriya. You see this whole area. This is very interesting. It looks like a tantric mandala, and you can see Vajra and so on here. Bottoms, and then before Sigiriya, or around the same time, this is another huge image, 42 feet or 43 feet high, was constructed. And now constructing that kind of high images appears at that time, not before that. So this is quite interesting. Sigiriya and this, I think this is his father, Kashyap's father, Dhatusena, who constructed this one. And these gives you kind of this 12th century. See the kind of other areas, but this is primarily Theravada temple, but there's a Mahayana element seriously in Galvihara there. So these are some of the examples. So Mahayana sculptures are found in Sri Lanka. And then there's very, very quickly, I'm going to mention and so on the ground. This is a very important part of Raja Silva's argument, so that's why I included the slide. And now this is the kind of the most important point that we are making. For De Silva, the greatest Mahayana monument in Sri Lanka is Sigiriya. The entire complex has been conceived as one integrated whole, a Mahayana mandala, a symbolic diagram of the meditative process to attain Buddhahood. The way to the summit leads through gardens, adulatory paths, ponds, and fountains, all objects of contemplation, which are surrounded by scattered monastic cells and caves. So this is the kind of one of the poetries, Venerable. And notably, the lion stairway, according to Buddhist iconography, was his idea, to remind the devotee of the Buddha, whose voice was like that of a roaring lion, enunciating the truth. So this kind of association he takes with Tara. And now I'm going to, I have a lot of slides, but I'm going to move most of them very quickly. And yeah, this is the point that I was just mentioning. Now, critique, there may be many critics, but I found one critique, D.G. Pereira. He tried to deconstruct his theory. There are many ideas, but maybe for you, these 3 points are important. So if a Mahayana monastery existed on the top, why visitors to Sigiriya do not mention it? One of his criticisms. Second, if there were a monastery, why none of the 645 graffiti verses refers to it? And then the third, why none refers to the figures in the frescoes as Tara? So the kind of critique come against Silva, pointing out, if he claims the Mahayana, these are the drawbacks of his argument. Now, I'm skipping and going to conclusion because I don't want to take all of your time. So very quickly. De Silva's theory regarding the cult of Tara and the Mahayana roots in Sigiriya prior to King Kassyapa's construction has some weaknesses. these stem from his entirely negative view of existing literary chronicles and the speculative part of his argument. Yet his work adds value by prompting us to reconsider Sigiriya's religious heritage and challenging us to reevaluate current interpretations of these sources and the cult of Tara. Ultimately, De Silva's perspective not only refines our understanding of Sigiriya's religious significance, but also opens important conversations like we have today about the evolving narratives in Sri Lanka's Buddhist heritage and can inspire future critical inquiry into this remarkable site and the expansion of Mahayana Buddhist thought in Sri Lanka. This area has not thoroughly examined in Sri Lanka, even though we have some publications. With this new theory of Sigiriya as a Mahayana Buddhist monastery, scholars can now imagine, reimagine, speculate, and argue over the religious significance of this highly secular and romantic site and its bearing on the historicity and cultic locus of images such as Tara at the British Museum. Thank you very much.
Deegalle for starting us off and giving us a sense of what Mahayana Buddhism in Sri Lanka was like in terms of sites as well as monuments, and connecting Tara at the British Museum to this World Heritage Site of Sigiriya. So I'm going to give you a sense of what some of these Tara sculptures from Sri Lanka were like by trying to do sort of a quick comparison between the main object of discussion tonight and also show how she's still relevant to this day for both Buddhist communities in Sri Lanka as well as the diaspora. As Venerable Deegalle was sharing with us earlier in his presentation, Mahayana stone and bronze sculptures have been discovered in Sri Lanka that date from around the 7th or 8th century. And as he mentioned, not surprisingly, we've got Avalokiteshvara as the most popular Mahayana deity in Sri Lanka in terms of the sculptures, and this is really not surprising. We see this throughout Asia as well, throughout Buddhist Asia, where of course he's known in different names as well. Although surviving sculptures of Tara do not number those of Avalokiteshvara, the diversity of materials, range of size, and location highlight her importance to Buddhist communities in Sri Lanka. And this map indicating the locations of these statues reveals that she was worshipped at Buddhist centers such as Anuradhapura and also in Buddhist merchant communities closer to the island's eastern coast. And this is where Anuradhapura is. Our sculpture, the Tara, has been sort of discovered in this particular region. Most depict her standing in the Abhanga posture, similar to the statue of Tara at the British Museum, while others portray her seated in Lalitasana and Virasana. Some sculptures hold the Vajrabha hand gesture combined with Kataka Mudra or Abhaya Mudra, while another depicts the Dhyana Mudra here, referring to sort of her hand gesture here, the gesture of giving, and here we see her seated in Dhyana Mudra, meditating. Some are quite small, but others are monumental. Such differences point to a diversity of patrons and functions and indicates the significance of this Buddhist goddess to Mahayana Buddhist communities in Sri Lanka. Most importantly, such differences also reveal the diverse ways Tara was understood as a goddess who gives and who also meditates, indicating her compassionate role as a teacher and as a potential to become an enlightened being. Although at the British Museum, Tara stands by herself today, she may have been part of a group of images, at Buddhism, a 9th or 10th century rock carved site in southeastern Sri Lanka. 7 monumental Mahayana deities are depicted, and you saw this earlier also with Venerable Deegalle's presentation. And I bring this to your attention really for 2 reasons. One, that Deegalle is in the southeastern part of the island. And this, again, I just want to remind us, this is the area that Tara at the British Museum may have been discovered. It's not that far. The presiding Buddha in this particular group of monumental sculptures, the presiding Buddha in the center is possibly Dipankara, while there are 2 groups of deities who are carved on either side. We have Avalokiteshvara, Maitri, and Vajrapani on the left-hand side of Dipankara, and on his right-hand side, we've got Sudhana, Avalokiteshvara, and Tara. This suggests that the goddess Tara may have been depicted and worshipped alongside other Buddhist figures in Sri Lanka. The Tara that is most similar to the statue at the British Museum is this rock-carved Tara at Buddhism. They share similarities in posture, dress, and hairstyle. In both renditions, her right hip is bent. I think I have some close-ups. And her weight is supported by her right leg. Her upper body is unclothed, and she wears this very tight-fitting cloth that is tied at the waist and clings to sort of her body. And she's got this piled-up tall, sort of cylindrical chignon that with this central triangular cavity at the top, indicating her connection to Buddha Amitabha. Both the bronze and the rock carving are fairly large in size, and hence illustrate not only the importance of Tara to Mahayana Buddhist communities in Sri Lanka, but they also show that she was possibly worshipped in public spaces. Now, sculptures of Tara continued to be created until the 14th century. In a 14th century Sandesha poem, or a messenger poem, the poet of the Tisara Sandesha devotes 5 verses to a temple called Doravaka Vihara in the central part of the island, which enshrine these 3 statues, including Shakyamuni Buddha, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, or Numata, as he's locally known, and one of Tara. I have the English translation here, and up here on the screen, but a number of you speak Sinhala and understand Sinhala, so I thought I'll share the verse with you. This is verse 131 from the Tisara Sandesha, and you hear her name being uttered in this verse. It's one of the last evocations we have to Tara in Sri Lanka, and it's from the 14th century. Bora yasa viyana maharu sirilak medura vesesi, Thora hara dosiri susiri lakarin lakala ekasi. Vara nova rosiru isuru dena sura biden sadisi, Tara biso bunudu namadaya gan ein nonasi. The previous 4 verses, indicate that by the 14th century, Tara was worshipped alongside the historical Buddha and the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara as a goddess who would bestow boons to her devotees, similar to Surabhidenu, and you hopefully heard her being compared to Surabhidenu, better known as Kamadhenu, the cow that gives. Although these 3 do not exist anymore, the 3 that I was referring to in this poem, most likely this sculpture Doravaka, Tara may have held the same hand gesture, the gesture of the Varada Mudra, the gesture of giving, as similar to the Tara at the British Museum. In this verse, you may have heard that she's called Biso, or Queen, in the 14th century, Tara was seen as a consort of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara or Numata, and was absorbed in the island's local Buddhist pantheon, which by the 14th century consisted of Mahayana and Hindu deities. So there may not have been that much of a distinction by the 14th century of Tara as sort of a Mahayana deity, but she alongside these other Buddhist and Hindu deities, have been absorbed into this pantheon of guardian figures. Two 14th century sculptures that do survive today are from two small temples in the outskirts of Kandy in central Sri Lanka. At Paskama Deegalle and Vegiria Deegalle, temples dedicated to Natha or Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Sculptures of Tara are placed next to Natha. Interviews conducted with lay priests in July of 2022 at both temples revealed that this goddess is now known as Patini, not as Tara. Although photographed by the scholars Nanda Senamudyanste, Ulrich von Schroeder, and John Holt for their publications, these two images of Tara or Patini, similar to the other images of Buddhist guardian deities housed in the main sanctums of devalas or temples to Buddhist deities, are never publicly revealed, even during annual processions, as they're considered too powerful to be seen by the laity. Sculptures of Buddhist deities are screened off by painted curtains, and you can sort of see this in one example here. They're screened off by painted curtains, only to be seen by the ritual lay specialists of these temples when they go inside. When Buddhist deities are taken in procession, it is only their insignia that is carried outside, generally on elephants. While the date when this tradition began is not known, the verse praising Tara that I shared with you earlier from the 14th century implies that it was still possible to see and approach her and worship her. We hear the poet, most likely a Buddhist monk, telling the messenger, the bird, to go and worship these deities, including Tara, before the bird leaves the temple. Although Tara is not worshipped in present-day Sri Lanka anymore, Patini, a Buddhist goddess, is worshipped widely throughout Sri Lanka in both Sinhala Buddhist and Tamil Hindu communities. The identification of the statue of Tara at the British Museum as Patini is recorded in the 19th century when it entered the collection of the British Museum as a donation in 1830 by Sir Robert Brownrigg. Brownrigg, if you recall, had captured the Kingdom of Kandy in 1815, an invasion that brought the entire island under the subjugation of the British as a crown colony until it regained its independence in 1948. A letter dated to June 1830 from Sophia Brownrigg, wife of Robert Brownrigg, to Henry Ellis, Secretary of the Society of Antiquaries, London, and Principal Librarian at the British Museum, states that the statue was, quote, representing one of the Hindu goddesses, which from the manner and place it was found was supposed to be of great antiquity and to represent the goddess Patina, and was found in the northeast part of Ceylon between Trincomalee and Patiklo in that port. This attribution of as the goddess Patini by the Brownriggs referred to her both as goddess Patina and Pataladeva in the two letters from Sophia Brownrigg in 1830. The gilt bronze sculpture of Tara at the British Museum may have been worshipped as Patini by local communities somewhere between Trincomalee and Patiklo soon after its discovery, in a similar manner to when the Sultan Ganj Buddha and the Dedar Ganj Virakshi were discovered and worshipped in India, becomes a tantalizing possibility. So far in my presentation, and I know I need to be really quick because I need to give my colleagues a chance to share their discoveries, I've been taking you very much into the past and comparing objects and sharing textual sources associated with the goddess Tara and the sculpture of Tara at the British Museum. Now I would like to conclude by reflecting on how Tara from Sri Lanka at the British Museum has become this generative image, one that has inspired various artworks, replicas, and most recently an award-winning short story. In 1830, the statue was included in James Stefanov's watercolor, and you see her sort of at the bottom here, placed alongside other Hindu and Buddhist sculptures. She's also included in this 1970s oil painting that's created by the artist Graham Arnold that featured various objects from the British Museum's Asian art collection. And she also inspired Sri Lankan modern artist George Crescent, a former founding member of the 43 group, created a print of the Tara. Now, all these three renditions are two-dimensional, but three-dimensional replicas have also been produced of the Tara as well. In 1937, a plaster cast was created in the UK as an offering to the first official request by the colonial government of Ceylon to repatriate the gilded bronze statue of Tara to Ceylon. Although I'm currently not able to verify the existence of this particular plaster cast at the Colombo National Museum, another replica exists in the galleries across from the gilt bronze Avalokiteshvara that you saw in Venerable Deegalle's presentation here. This was possibly commissioned by the former Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Ranasinghe Premadasa, who may have seen the gilt bronze sculpture of Tara at the Sri Lanka exhibition in 1981 at the Commonwealth Institute. Or maybe he may have seen it. I've had been semi-structured interviews with some of my colleagues who work at the Colombo National Museum, and some suggest that it also may have been, he may have seen it when he came for King Charles and Princess Diana's wedding. Christopher Mundaci has also commissioned two bronze sculptures of Tara, one of which I believe is in storage at the British Museum. At the Sri Natha Deegalle in Kandy, a devotee has offered a sculpture of the Tara to be worshipped at this royal temple to Avalokiteshvara. It is cloth and not to be, it's cloth over covering it and it's not to be seen. And last but not least, Venerable Galbada Jnanasira Podihamaduru at the Gangarama temple in Colombo has also commissioned a Tara for his temple. And each of these replicas also have an important story to tell that needs to be certainly explored further. Tara is not forgotten by Sri Lankans in Sri Lanka nor the diaspora. So I'm going to leave you with that to think a little bit more about the Tara, and I am going to now hand over the podium to Laurie.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I just want to take a minute just to thank Sujatha and the Research Forum here at the Courtauld for this invitation. And that's just a real pleasure to be here with all of you, to be back here at the Courtauld, and to be part of this event with such esteemed panelists. And for me, honestly, there really isn't a better way to spend an evening than to be thinking about this really beautiful and fascinating sculpture. So as Sujatha has already explained, I believe she mentioned that I used to teach with her on this MA program that was focused on Buddhism and Buddhist heritage. And I just want to emphasize this course was quite unique in that it brought together faculty from art history and conservation, and it brought us into the classroom together, and it also brought us into many museums to look at objects together. And so what I really want to convey to you is the importance of this interdisciplinary approach to looking at objects, and I hope to give you just some of my reflections. What I will be talking about today is very preliminary, and I hope it also encourages you to be looking at these objects from different perspectives. So I will launch into my presentation. So I hope you will humor me, because for me, it really is important to give some context to this program here at the Courtauld and our interdisciplinary approach. And you'll see here, there's a quote at the top, which basically says that the scope of and structure of the Courtauld Institute cannot be complete without a fully equipped laboratory, or department for scientific research into the physical character, conservation, and restoration of works of art. This is from the early founding of the Courtauld. This was the idea that art history and conservation had to be side by side and paired in how we think about and how we study and research works of art. So I wanted to just provide that as some context, and the image that you see on the right is an image from the 1930s, which shows the early conservation department here at the Courtauld. So this is just to set the stage, because it is in this spirit that we began this investigation of this sculpture. Now here you see Tara, and I information page about Tara. From my own perspective, the object. So the object its religious function, and also how that might have changed over time, and also how it ended up in the possession of Robert Brownrigg and then ended up at the British Museum. So these are all points of time. What I'm looking at as a conservator is physical evidence. What can we see? And we should say that we did this all through visual examination. There was no scientific investigation that was undertaken. So this is very preliminary. This is what you yourself can do when you go see this object. So we are looking for clues that helps us tell a fuller story of this object. It helps us ask questions, and I will say that this did lead to many more questions, but it helps us also formulate perhaps a research agenda, which maybe the British Museum or other scholars will pick up upon. So when we think about objects, bronze objects, such as the Tara, I think many of you will know about the technology of bronze objects. We always would try to tell our students that this is important for them to understand, even if they don't become conservators. They need to understand about materials, they need to understand techniques of execution and how things were made. This I just show, just for some general interest, this is a recent publication, which is open access by the Getty Publications, which is focused on technical examination of bronze sculpture. And this is bronze sculpture from any parts of the world, but it gives you a sense of terminology. It gives you lots of photographs so that you yourself can identify different aspects that might help you in your understanding of whatever types of bronze objects that you were looking at. So the object of Tara, and I show here just some details. I mean, obviously this is a very, very special, very beautiful object. There are aspects of it that I think we need to be thinking about in terms of its construction. So Sujatha has already mentioned that Tara is a very large statue. In fact, it is the largest surviving bronze statue from Sri Lanka. It is significantly larger. It stands at 143 centimeters, so it is nearly life-size. It is just under 5 feet tall. This statue is also lost wax casting, and many of you might know the technique of lost wax casting. But the thing to remember is that this is a solid cast statue. So it is not hollow. It is a solid cast. It is entirely composed of bronze. Bronze is a copper alloy, and by that, it means that copper is the main statue, and it has different amounts of other metals, so tin, as well as lead in small amounts. I'm going to just pause here because I think if we think about a statue that is 5 feet tall, that is solid bronze, we have to think about how much material would have been needed in terms of available metals. We have to think about the available expertise and knowledge in order to produce an object of this size. This would have required multiple pours of molten metal. This would have created extremely difficult conditions because you have to pour consecutively, and you do not want the metal to cool in such a way that you have, between the different pours, you create weaknesses in the metal. So the fact that Tara here was created, there's very few flaws in the technology of this statue. So it tells us that there was a really high level of sophistication. There was knowledge in order to know how to create an object of this size and of this scale. You will notice also that the object is gilded. So this is also an important aspect that this of the Tara. So the one thing I want to include here is this 12th century text. And of course, we know that Tara is earlier than this, but we also need to understand the connection between casting something as solid bronze versus casting something with a hollow format. So you're reading this, I can tell. The artist who wants to attain blessedness by it must not make a statue with a hollow body, be it out of gold, iron, or any other materials. If a statue is made with a hollow body, there will be, as a consequence, strife and quarreling and loss of possessions. Soon there will be famine, trade and traffic will subside, and the king will be ousted. An offense against this rule results in the loss of all possessions and even life. And obviously this is very dramatic, and I know that this is a later document, but I think there is a connection as well between casting something as solid bronze, and there is a choice being made here. There is a linkage between technology and religious function. I also just want to draw attention to there have been numerous investigations to look at both Indian and Sri Lankan bronzes, and you see here just a selection of these types of investigations. And there are a huge array of scientific investigations and tests that were used, and I don't want to go into any of this with too much detail, other than to just draw attention to one of our colleagues, and this is his publication here, Arjuna Tantalaga, and he has done recent work which has started to think about locations, also looking at sites where these bronzes might have been produced in Sri Lanka. So this is something that we want to also ensure that we are drawing attention to local voices in this work. And this is where you see Arjuna here, and this was during a meeting in Sri Lanka in 2023. I just quickly want to now move from technology to condition. So we know that bronze can deteriorate. We know that bronze as a metal can corrode. It can, depending on its environmental conditions, the condition can alter, and there can be surface accretions, and we can sometimes see something which is known as bronze disease. So conditions are also important because conditions can tell us a bit about the life of the object. It's what has happened to it over the years. So we really want to be thinking about what condition can tell us. And I show here on the right, this is another book which might be of interest, which is focused on thinking about bronze and copper objects. And it talks a lot about corrosion and ways of identifying different types of conditions. Another way to think about condition is to compare it against other objects. And I know that we have seen this object already twice. And if we look at the two objects here, we can see Tara. We can see that there are definitely different types of conditions that Tara has. And just to show you in some detail, she has quite deep gouges on her right cheek, on her nose, also on the left side of her face. These gouges are so prominent that they were reproduced in the replica that Sujatha has showed here. You also have missing fingers, missing toes. So the question is, what happened to this object? What created this loss? And as a solid cast object, this is a very stable, very strong object, so damaging it is something that would require quite substantial either environmental exposure or some sort of severe event happening to it. There's also, when you look at the front side and you compare it against the back side, you can see there's a noticeable difference here. The front side is polished, the gilding is polished, whereas the back side you see is there's either abrasion or the back was never completed, or possibly it was buried or laid on its back, which would have created a different type of condition, or it was never meant to be viewed from the back. I mean, these are all things that we can think about. And finally, I will just conclude here, which is thinking about what has happened to it in its modern history. So since being acquired, or since it became into the collection of the British Museum. And the British Museum is fantastic in that they include their conservation records online. So you can see here that there has been some cleaning of the object. There's also been this polishing of the surface, and there has been very kind of minimal stabilization treatments to the object. So this also provides us some information about the condition, perhaps when the object arrived, and also interventions that have been undertaken to the object. So I'm going to just conclude there, and I guess hand over to Sushma.
So much. I love this kind of collaborative presentations. You learn so much from each other. I've already learned loads. Actually, just a tiny bit of an update, I guess, from Laura's work. I did speak to some of our amazing conservators and metal scientists at the museum, and it turns out that historically she wasn't polished at the back, only her front. And also she's going to be x-rayed when she's deinstalled. I've been wanting to do this for such a long time and finally had an opportunity. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll hopefully know even more about her, which is really exciting. I'm so glad to be talking about Sri Lanka again, because quite a few years ago, I was doing quite a lot of work on collecting histories and Sri Lanka, and had to do a big pause whilst I did 2 other galleries and this exhibition. But hopefully in the coming months, I can return to a real interest. So it's really brilliant to be speaking about time today. So I'm going to do something slightly different. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about her collecting history that we have, and then move forward about 200 years and talk about her contemporary display at the moment in the Ancient Indian Living Traditions exhibition. And here we go, lots of different kinds of pictures here. So I'm going to talk about how she ended up at the British Museum. And you might assume that, she was always meant to, she was discovered, and the next thing that happened was that she was given to the museum. That's really not what happened. So she came to the museum from General Sir Robert Brownrigg. He was born in Ireland, joined the British Army at the age of 17, and spent almost 50 years in service. And in 1813, he was appointed governor of Ceylon, obviously now Sri Lanka, and Sujatha told us a bit more about that. And it's actually from 2 letters we have in the museum's archive that we can reconstruct a little bit more about the history of Brownrigg's association with Tara and his donation of the sculpture to the museum. So you can see letter 1 on the right-hand side over there, nice big oval next to it as well. In the central archive, we've got a copy of a letter dated June 1830 that was written by Lady Sophia Brownrigg, Sir Robert's wife, because he was unable to write due to ill health. Apparently he had weakness in his hands, as part of his ill health. And it's addressed to Mr. Ellis, Principal Librarian of the British Museum, which is equivalent to the modern post of Director. And he was also, importantly, Secretary of the Society of Antiquaries. And it's through this letter we know that originally Brownrigg actually offered this statue to the Society of Antiquaries, not to the British Museum. And to this end, he actually invited somebody he knew, one of the Society's prominent fellows, and you can see Sir Thomas Lawrence, a prominent portraitist, to his home in London to look at the sculpture and then to present it to the Society on behalf of Sir Robert. Unfortunately, Sir Thomas died before he could actually do this, and I'm assuming that it's actually because of the connection between Brownriggs and Lawrence that they asked him to come and look at the sculpture and intercede between them and the Society. I will point out, I included this portrait of Lady Brownrigg because it was painted by Lawrence over there. Now we have a second letter, and the second letter from Lady Brownrigg indicates that Mr. Ellis had suggested donating the sculpture to the museum rather than giving it to the Society of Antiquaries. So clearly his loyalties were divided, and he decided, you know, with his British Museum hat on, that that's where the object should go. And that's what happened. So on the 6th of December 1830, Tara was formally acquired by the museum and registered into its collections. And I'll tell you briefly about registration numbers in case anyone is remotely interested. So her registration number is 1830,0612.4. That means she came to the museum in 1830, and then on the 6th of December 0612 is when she entered the collections formally. .4, she was number 4 in the collection that was acquired. And what's really interesting is that only one part of one side of a page of this multiple page letter focuses on Tara. Actually, the rest of the pages go into considerable detail about a larger collection of, get this, insects that Brownrigg collected for the, quote, national collections, quote, at some expense and trouble. And he talks more about his stick insect collection than he does about Tara. I think, again, we assume that for the Brownriggs, this was a really iconic, important statue. Actually, she was less important than their natural history collections. So I think we need to reassess how we think about Tara now compared with how the people who discovered her thought about Tara. And then going back to letter 1, this is where Brownrigg notes where Tara was found, and Sujatha did mention this before. And I'm just going to quote a teeny bit of this. So, Sir Robert Brownrigg, his compliments to Mr. Ellis, and takes the liberty of addressing him as Society Secretary to the Royal Antiquarian Society upon the subject of a figure which he wishes to present to that society, representing one of the, quote, Hindu goddesses, which from the manner and place it was found was supposed to be of great antiquity, and to have presented the goddess Patina. It was found in the northeast part of Ceylon, between Trincomalee and Batticaloa. Now, it's been said that she was immediately placed out of sight of the public when she entered the museum, but recent research, this was actually a week and a half ago, I did indicate that this was simply not true. Because I found multiple copies of the synopsis of the contents of the British Museum, which were published, you know, over quite a number of years. It reveals that she was on public display in a very prominent location between about 1844 and 1848. And this was the passage leading from room 12 to the Grand Central Saloon. I'm actually trying to figure out where exactly this was located, because the footprint of the museum has changed. The gallery numbers have also changed. But those are pictures of the Grand Central Saloon. So, you know, they've got some really important Greek, Roman and Egyptian sculptures in there, including a really famous Venus at her bath presented by King William IV. So she was in a prominent location next door, and she was displayed alongside a range of sculptures and objects from basically the rest of the world: India, China, Mexico, the Middle East, and it also included the Sanchi Yakshi. So some really interesting and really important, iconic objects. And it was only in about 1865, so 35 years after she came to the museum, that apparently she was placed inside the so-called secretum, along with hundreds, actually eventually over 1,000 other objects in the collections that were considered indecent. And gentlemen had to apply to study these objects, and they began to emerge from the secret museum within a museum from about 1912 onwards. People have written that she was in this space, but nothing more than that. And in fact, very little seems to be known about her within the secretum. And I'd really like to know a lot more, because it's one thing to say, oh yes, she was placed in there. When? By whom? When did she emerge? How long was she in there? Who applied to look at her? How many people knew she was in that space? What was she alongside exactly? So again, you see this throwaway sentence or two, but there's so much more digging you can do to learn more about that. I'm also going to zoom forward a very long time now to the present day, and just spend a few minutes talking about the display of Tara in my current exhibition, but also in the Houghton Gallery. Now, I was involved with the Houghton Gallery, first ever gallery I ever kind of curated, really, and that opened in 2017. And here she stands right in front of the incredible Amaravati sculptures in the gallery, and on the right-hand section, just where she is a case on Sri Lanka that I also got to curate. Now, the only interpretation here is one label, which I got to write, and at the time, I didn't know a great deal about Sri Lanka or the art history of Sri Lanka, and I did a bit of intensive learning at the time. I've learned considerably more ever since. But actually, you'd need to know and come to the gallery with quite a lot of pre-existing knowledge to understand why she was placed in this location, and what the links between southern India, especially Andhra, where the Amaravati sculptures are from, and Sri Lanka as well. That information isn't shared with you there. I had to fight quite hard to get this quite long label for this object. I was originally given 60 words, but I negotiated up to 80 for this one. And in the exhibition, you have so much more scope to try something different, and that's why I decided to move Tara temporarily from the Houghton Gallery into the exhibition space. And I have to say, this is not always an easy decision, because it's behind a paywall for a few months. But it is a temporary measure. It's free to see the exhibition on Fridays, and we've had lots of community events where people can come and see the exhibition for free as well. And I thought the opportunity to display her in a different context with different interpretation was just, it wasn't going to happen again anytime soon, and I had to take advantage of it. And as you can see here, I placed Tara right next to other Buddhist deities and bodhisattvas in a section that is focused on collecting histories and provenance. That entire section is collecting histories and provenance. And so the interpretation here is really quite different. It was also a great opportunity to include documents from the museum's central archive. This is one of the letters that I've shared with you before, to give visitors a better understanding of how some objects came to the museum's collections, and actually to explain, I think this whole section explains that it's never a straightforward, well, never say never, it's very rarely a very straightforward process, and there were so many different possibilities for where objects would be contributed and how that happened. And for Tara, I think if Lawrence didn't pass away, it's likely she would have been deposited in the Society of Antiquaries. I don't think she would have come to the British Museum. But because he died, the Brownriggs ended up contacting Ellis, who evidently suggested the BM would be a better place for Tara to come. So, he was associated with both institutions, and he chose the British Museum in this case. And alongside the additional provenance, which I've included for every single object in this exhibition, which is quite unusual, there were also larger panels. You can just about see it kind of just there. And it's designed like an archaeologist's notebook, worked with a really brilliant graphic designer to make that happen. I think this also gives you more understanding, and if you're reading about the really complex story of the Amaravati sculptures that came to the museum, again, via another institution. That wasn't a direct move into the British Museum. We're looking at the Indian Museum, and it's only thanks to Frank's in the 19th century that they came to the British Museum and not the V&A. They could quite easily have ended up at another institution after the Indian Museum, the East India Company's Indian Museum, closed. And in these labels, done a lot more learning since that original 2017 moment, I shared a story of the cultural connections between Sri Lanka and southern India, and did that in different ways. So actually, just say a couple of words about these labels. You don't often, when you see museum labels, you won't always, in fact, you very rarely get such a lengthy collecting history, but every object in the show has that, and it's really important that it was there. And I think when you have this other piece there as well, so even though you're looking at this incredible Buddhist image, I wanted people to think about how she arrived at the museum, when that happened, and the people that were involved. And so for these bits of text here and this particular label, it's more of a narrative. It's not a simple series of dates, not, acquired on this date, moved on this date. I wanted people to know a bit more about who the people were involved and the dates and the regions. And on social media, when you look at posts on Tara, they'll often say, oh no, she wasn't found in this particular place. But I'm saying, well, actually, this is a letter from the person who found the object. And more than that, given the power relationships at the time, he had no reason not to explain exactly where he found it. And as I mentioned, this sculpture for him wasn't as important as the natural history collections. So I think actually when you look at the actual evidence, which I'm showing to people, the other narratives you see online, they don't quite work. Now, in this whole section, there's a case that's filled with really beautiful images from Sri Lanka. And here I really wanted to share the cultural connections between Sri Lanka and southern India, which is the rest of the gallery in the space, through this limestone sculpture, which is carved with divine serpents, and also a really beautiful small Buddha image on the right-hand side with a beautiful flame-shaped Ushnisha, which is quite a distinctive feature found in Sri Lankan and southern Indian sculptures, and which speaks to the transport of sacred objects, the exchange of artistic ideas between the two regions. And then there's also the design element. This is the really exciting part, I think, as well, when you're doing an exhibition. And we worked with a really super lighting designer called Lucy Record to light Tara differently from the permanent display in the Hotel Gallery. There, you only have the lighting from above and through the windows coming from the side. But here, I really wanted her lit not only from above, but also from below. So you can really pick out the details of the lower garment and just how exquisite the artistry is, because it is spectacular and it's really easy to miss all of that. And so when we were going through the gallery and kind of adjusting the lighting and stuff, I think this was a really wonderful moment to show her in this very different way. Now, I'm going to stop now because we're almost at 7:15. But just to say, the exhibition is open until the 19th of October. It is free on Fridays, so do go and visit if you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sushma. Thank you, Marian. Thank you, Venerable Deegalle, for expanding our understanding of the Tara and its histories, its religious significance, and also getting us to think about its condition, technique, materials, and the curatorial history of it. So what I'd like to do now, we have around 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes to have a discussion. I'd love to have our panelists please come and join us in the front of here. So I want to start off by asking whether, first of all, thank you for joining me on this project. I'm trying to sort of think about the Tara from these different angles, from different disciplines. Lots of things I learned today from all of you, but I'm just curious to know whether you all have any questions for each other before we sort of open up the discussion to the audience.
Just an observation.
Yes.
Just an observation. I think because Buddhist Museum one, it says Pattini, and we tend to call Tara. But don't you think the crown in this one is absent in Pattini? This is a iconographical question because Taras always have the space for the Buddha, but whereas Pattini may not have it, yeah? So maybe when it was acquired, people did not have the knowledge, the critical knowledge of what the iconography is like in Tara, and so they treated because it's female, oh, this found in eastern part of Sri Lanka, considered as Pattini. You know, it's just an observation. Yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right in that Pattini, of course, has a different iconography. She also holds, for those of you who are familiar with this Buddhist goddess who's worshipped by both the single and Tamil communities in Sri Lanka, she holds two anklets. She's, of course, the heroine of the Shilapadikaram Tamil text. And so she looks very different, but I'm not entirely sure what happens between the 14th century and the 19th century. We certainly, don't have a lot of material culture remaining from the 15th, 16th century. We have these numerous moments of colonial incursions. Before before the island becomes a crown colony, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British. And so in my most recent work, I generally turned to the ivories that were traded, gifted, and Pattini appears. It's not Tara who appears in some of these ivories. And you see this particular iconography of a deity holding not necessarily anklets, but creepers. There's also a bow goddess. I mean, I'm calling her a bow goddess because she holds onto a bow. I don't exactly know who she is, but certainly she seems to have been popular in the 17th, 18th, 19th century because she tends to appear in some of these ivory carvings as well. Sometimes she's identified as Sita, and in those ivories you sort of see her with Rama, but then at other times she is her own goddess. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure why Tara is perhaps replaced by Pattini. I think certainly there have been studies on Pattini, but perhaps not on thinking about the various Buddhist deities that were being worshipped in Sri Lanka. And perhaps, that's an opportunity for us to think further about.
I think they would have been really reliant on local people for any knowledge about what they were digging up, because there was no art historical kind of, expertise, especially not in the subcontinent, in any way in this period. I mean, even at the British Museum, it came way later than that. And in fact, at that point, they didn't even know the difference between Jain sculpture and Buddhist sculpture, because when you dug up Amravati, initially it was believed it was, it was a Jain actually, and it was only later that knowledge came. So actually this tells us a lot about maybe who they were associating with and who were they meeting and talking to, rather than their own inherent knowledge about any of these gods or goddesses or any of the enlightened teachers.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting point about when do we start? When does art history or archaeology start to come in? And it's much later. This is 1813. You were saying, right? That he becomes, I guess, the governor.
Yeah.
And so
It's a time of conquest.
yes, it is a time of conquest. Yes.
Boundary was the really conqueror.
Yes, yes. And it's really, we begin to see the Archaeological Survey of India being established later, and Bell, who you were referring to, Venerable Deegalle, he is excavating in the 1880s, 1890s, so much later. But then I would also want to acknowledge perhaps the possibility that the people who may have been around and saw her as Pattini, because there was a very strong belief in Pattini and the possibility that objects, just like deities, can change, have multiple identities as they evolve. Further questions or thoughts before we open it up to the audience? Yes, yeah.
Just one question. tend to discuss this, just my stuff. Basically, have issues found in Tara statues down in southern India, like Tamil Nadu, so next door to Sri Lanka. So then, at one point, Buddhism was actually present in Tamil Nadu. So I'm just wondering whether there actually was the connection between Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka, perhaps with the same form of Buddhism. So maybe, just wondering if you have actually ever found any Tara statues in southern India, like Tamil Nadu or anywhere in southern India as well.
That is a great question. So thank you. Yes, at some point it would be really important for us to sort of expand this investigation further. If you think back to connections between South India and Sri Lanka, especially Tamil Nadu, we have to start, and it's because of the material, bronze, we have to start thinking about the Nagapattinam Buddhas. So I can't think of a Tara that has been discovered as part of the Nagapattinam bronzes, but this is not to say there was no contact. The Chola, as you probably know, the Chola kings do come over to Sri Lanka and they take over the Rajaraja region. They do establish, perhaps the merchants do, a Buddhist temple called the Rajaraja Perumpalli in the region that this Tara has been discovered in the Trincomalee region. And we know these through inscriptions, and we also know the point that Sushma was talking about earlier in her curatorial display, the current curatorial display of the Tara. She places that beautiful little Buddha, seated Buddha with the light, the flame.
Yeah.
And you sort of see that in these Nagapattinam bronzes as well as in Sri Lanka. So there was certainly exchange occurring. We know that from the material remains, but I can't think of a Tara that. Yeah, it's
only much earlier from these cultures.
I think the likely place is Amaravati if it is found.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll start looking for it.
I think you mentioned that in the past people didn't know about proper conventions when excavating, but what I've missed, I think, is how, where Sir Robert Brownrigg found Tara, because you don't just find a 1.43 meter statue. It's not like finding a bracelet. So how was it, and where, and what were her whereabouts before?
I mean, we don't know.
Yeah.
I think the simple answer is what we have are the two letters we have. The only thing he tells us is that she was found between Trincomalee and Batticalow. Apart from that, we don't know. I mean, I don't know if anyone's consulted any more of his letters. I don't even know if more of his letters have survived. I haven't done that bit of research yet. So at this point, I'm afraid I've got nothing for you, which is not very helpful.
Found could be a euphemism.
Yes.
I mean, possibly. I think it's really interesting, given the wear patterns on her and the bits that are missing. That, to me, having not done this bit of research yet, suggests that she wasn't, standing in some kind of temple or shrine. Maybe she's more likely to have been buried in some way. So, and that's going from a kind of more of a conservation scientific angle, just looking at those wear patterns and things.
Because during that time, I think the soldiers traveled throughout the country, and there are other occasions that they found sites when they were going from Batticalow to Trincomalee. So this may have been an expedition, probably when they're going through it, probably they found it maybe somewhere. So it's more likely, because that time the British were exploring the country and they were going to every inch of the country, and so probably more likely, it's a hypothesis, but probably military, because he was a military man. Brownrigg was a military man, and so So he was the head of the military, and so his juniors, subordinates may have discovered it probably.
And I think also they were really reliant on local people because, as you say, they didn't know where all these places were. They didn't know what was available. I did more research into Hugh Neville, who was a colonial official much later on, and he was completely reliant on local people for finding certain kinds of objects. In fact, working with candy workshops, more contemporary objects as well. It wasn't just a random case of walking around and magically finding something. You relied on these really important networks. And even when you look earlier in India, in fact, in the early 19th century or late 18th century, already you've got people, and you've got really interesting records that survive in the British Library from the East India Company as well, with notes saying, I was sent on this collecting trip, had X amount of money, and I've sent to find, I don't know, Roman coins in India. And when you look at, say, Colin Mackenzie, who was the first Surveyor General of India for the East India Company, it's exactly what he's doing. He started off life in Stornoway, really interested in learning more about the history of the subcontinent, and he had a whole network of local Indian people. Some were pundits, others were travellers. Just they were going around buying stuff for him. So actually, it wasn't just the soldiers walking through a place. They couldn't find all the stuff themselves. They were reliant on other people, and that's the same with why he thought she was called Patina, aka Bunny. That's not something he would have known. That somebody else would have had to tell him that. Absolutely, yeah.
I was interested in what you were saying about like expanding the labels surrounding Tara and the way that I was wondering what the particular significance you think was about expanding the detail and how Tara was acquired, like in comparison to other objects.
Oh, it's not just in comparison to other objects. I did it for every object in the show. I mean, for about, God, I know, a long time now, probably too long now. I'm doing a lot of research into collecting history. My PhD students are doing projects on collecting history. So for me, it's really interesting, but I think it's also really important. And we worked with a really fantastic group of our community advisory panel when we were putting the show together. And for them, it was also really important. So kind of like a double whammy. I don't think you can do a show on early South Asia or South Asia without really investigating the collecting history too. And so it's not just this one object, actually it's all of them. Everything that we had on loan from other institutions, as well as the museum's own objects on display too.
So, I remember reading, I remember reading somewhere about kind of Mahayana in Sri Lanka, and from what I read, it said something like there was a king who talked about followers of the false sutras or something like this. There was a term that they used, and it was something like followers of the false sutras. And I just wondered if what knowledge there is about that period and that king and what influence that person had, and whether or not some of the damage on the statue might be related to a kind of a movement of reform in Sri Lanka to change the emphasis on what was being worshipped. I don't know, that's just a thought, but thanks.
Maybe perhaps both of us can try to answer that.
I think there were disputes earlier on, like 1st century, maybe 3rd century and so on. Then the story says that around the 12th century, the Buddhism was unified, so the divisions were unified, especially remember the statue by 12th century Buddha image. So that kind of climax of the unification, and there you see Mahayana elements are incorporated into Theravada one on the background. It's like a mandala. So it doesn't mean they were persecuted, but this area could have been a safe place if the Raja de Silva's argument is accurate, because it's a periphery, it's not the center, like until the 10th century, capital was in Anuradhapura. So this it was built 5th century, so 5 centuries before, 5 centuries after. So it's possible when the center is, Anuradhapura is for for Theravada, so maybe the people who were different views would went to periphery, and so the Sigiriya would have been an ideal place to do your practices, and so it doesn't draw the attention of the center even if there are persecution. But persecutions are occasionally you see it, but not. I think what happened is actually the mainstream form absorbed them. That's why even the Patini and so on, the Natha and so on, they all merge together. So more likely, it's a natural process, I think, because 12th century transform, unified, and then everything goes down. And also, you have to remember here the situation what's happening in India, because disappearance of Buddhism from India by the 11th, 12th century, so the less interaction, Mahayana forms to South India, and so on. All of these factors, I think we don't know for sure, but the situation is quite complex.
And just to add to what Venerable Deegalle was just sharing with us, I would say that sort of in another response to your question about damage, possible persecution, generally if you look at textual sources like the Pali Buddhist Chronicles, the Mahavamsa and the Chulavamsa, you hear of this incursion by a Kali king, Maga in 1215. Sometimes a number of the destructions that take place in some of these ancient cities are attributed to him. I don't know whether we can attribute everything, and that would be 1215, the destruction of Polonnaruwa, but there's of course a certain rebuilding of these ancient capitals as well. But if you think back to sort of Laurie's presentation and think about what the missing toes, the sort of the deterioration, the damage, and the possibility that it may have been buried, we see that pattern with other bronzes as well. In Polonnaruwa, if you think of the beautiful Hindu bronzes that were created in Polonnaruwa for the Hindu temples there, from around the 10th century to about the 12th century, those were also discovered as hoards, buried. And this same thing happens with the Buddhist bronzes. That beautiful bodhisattva that you saw in a number of the presentations of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, that was part of a larger hoard that was discovered. So there are moments when, both in South India and in Sri Lanka, when perhaps there are possibilities of incoming armies coming, that bronzes are protected by sort of burying them. But it's very hard to sort of fathom, I guess, to figure out when Tara may have been buried and why.
I also when sculptures were damaged, they were often no longer considered suitable to keep inside a shrine or a temple, and then they would have been either buried or immersed in water too. So that's another possibility.
Hi, thanks so much. Just a quick question on your choice to have the detailed descriptions of the heritage of the objects in terms of how they were located. Obviously, I understand if you don't want to speak for other curators, but is that representative of a movement in the British Museum and other sorts of museums to try and... Is this something that you've specifically done, or is this something that's going to maybe continue happening in the future exhibitions? I understand if you don't know, but is that something that you're trying to promote to the British Museum?
Bit of this, bit of that, really, to be perfectly honest. For me, it's a real interest. It's one of my key research interests anyway, and it's also one of my non-negotiables going into this show. I didn't want to do it if I didn't work with a community panel, and I didn't want to do it if I couldn't have collecting history fully integrated into the whole of the show. And I think one of the new things I brought to this one is actually having more of a narrative for all of these moments of collecting history, to humanize all of these people, because it wasn't an abstract process. People were involved in the movement of all of these objects, some really unexpected, some quite familiar. And so I just wanted to bring that story fully in. And actually the Hugh, I don't know if you saw it, but the Hugh Locke exhibition, which was before mine in just above the round reading room, that did it in a really different way, a really fresh way. I went to that show about 3 times, which I don't normally do, because it also talks about provenance and collecting history, but from a completely different angle, the perspective of Hugh Locke. And we've got a forthcoming exhibition on Hawaii, which I'm really looking forward to. I think it opens in about January, February kind of time. And they're doing something similar. So it's nice to kind of launch something a bit different and seeing it kind of take on its own life in all these different shows. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. It was fascinating. And I wanted to come back to the theme, which was how much can you learn from each other and how important it is for conservation to work with art history, archaeology, curating and so on. And I wanted to ask Laurie and Sushma about what you think could be, in an ideal world, what technical analysis could be done with Tara, and what body of other material would you need to or be ready to relate to, and what perhaps exists in the southern subcontinent, for example, already. No, what's the knowledge base? And I mean, do you have other information that can help? And so as part of that, what are the exact techniques that ideally you would need to
I'm ready to start writing.
Thanks, Debbie, for that question. I mean, I think this has been, I guess, part of the issue has been that the scientific investigation that has so far been undertaken has really been a bit hit or miss. You'll see the dates of some of the sources I showed. I mean, they date back to the 70s. So, you know, scientific investigations and methods have progressed. So I do think there is scope to be looking again in more detail. And it should be said that Tara, some of these scientific investigations require sampling, and that is something that's always tricky. So, you know, we don't often have that information. So I think what Sushma mentioned about, I mean, first of all, the X-raying of this object will be extremely fascinating. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you might find there, because I think you know, a lot of what I talked about was based on visual examination, so we don't know. And there are things I didn't show or I didn't talk about, but there are small things that you see on the statue, which, you know, are difficult to explain. So, you know, there could be a whole nother story that might be, you know, waiting around the corner, that might give us some more information about this period of time, because there is so much we don't know about the life history of this object. So I think a really good just physical examination of the object. I think also looking, you know, microscopy to look at the object. You know, I think some of the objects had paint on them. I mean, not Tara, they have never identified paint, but, you know, are there traces of any decoration that might be there? Because, I mean, you can see she's not ornamented really. So yeah, I think there's a lot more that could be discovered about this object.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important and interesting. I really like working, because I'm so lucky to work in a place where I have access to brilliant scientists and conservators. And it's something I've done for the longest time. When I wanted to learn more about the Boomerang casket, for example, I spoke to Rachel Berridge, our fantastic metals conservator, and actually through that conversation we found that actually the lid is missing, because at the top of it it's completely unfinished as a surface. It was never meant to look like that. More recently worked with fantastic stone conservator Michelle Hercules, I love the name, who's the one who identified that tiny bit of blue pigment on the Parthenon sculptures. And so I went through the Amaravati gallery with her and I said, please find me some pigment, and she did. So that's something else, you know, we can investigate and look into. And the same with Tara, working with the fantastic Aude Mongetti and our metals conservator again, to look at her, and that's how we found out actually the back is because she wasn't polished. And there were all these really interesting little patches, sort of dotted around. It doesn't seem to be in a particular kind of pattern. But what exactly does that mean? What was that? And hopefully through maybe the X-ray, maybe other kinds of analysis, we can figure that out and learn more about her production. So that's what we're doing, which is really exciting, actually.
Thank you. Thank you. We have run over, but maybe we can continue this conversation over tea and cookies at the Research Forum seminar room. I want to thank my fellow panelists and of course all of you for joining us today for this conversation on the Tara. Please go see the exhibition and please join us in the Research Forum.